Go. Welcome and God bless everyone. Thankful for you. Thank you for your being here and the time to get into the Word together. You can turn to Genesis chapter 30. It's going to be a minute before we get there. Last week, we covered Genesis 28 and 29. And before I go further, I got to say this is Thursday, January 23rd, 2025. So Jim can put this up on our YouTube channel, which if you want to watch the YouTubes on my notifications that I send out every Thursday to remind everyone, it's at the bottom of the page. It's in my signature. You can find the links and places if you want to make donations, you can, and some other information. We also have Sunday mornings at 10:30 Eastern and prayer meetings every morning, 6 days a week, starting at 10 o'clock Eastern. And we also are now doing Sunday night. Jim Berzo is doing Journey Through the Old Testament. Um, it's authored by John Shainheit, which is a wonderful class that you'll be hearing some of the things that I teach here in that class. So that's also available. So we looked at Genesis 28 and 29 last week. And at the end of chapter 29, toward the last few verses, you'll recall that Jacob ended up with two wives. He was after Rachel, but sneaky little Uncle Laban slipped Leah into the marriage tent. And before you know it, they were married. And so Jacob wasn't too happy about that. And he complained to Laban, says, that's all right. That's all right. You can have Rachel too. You can have her now. You just have to serve another 7 years. He knows how to drive a deal, doesn't he? And we're going to find out he's not always the honest deal maker as the chapters go through here. So anyhow, Jacob worked for 14 years for these two women. So he comes out of, so he now has two wives when he was only going there for one. And so at the end of chapter 29, his first wife, Leah, starts having babies. And that's a good thing. But not so good as Rachel seems to be kind of barren. She's not having babies. So right off the bat, Leah bore Jacob's firstborn, and his name was Reuben. And we all know we're talking about the 12 tribes, right? Jacob has 12 sons that will become the 12 tribes of Israel because Jacob's name will eventually be changed to Israel. Therefore, the 12 tribes of Israel, referring back to Jacob, and they will take over the land of Canaan where Abraham was told to go, and they will divide it all up. So she starts having babies, and she has the first one, Reuben, and that means see, a son. That's a good name. She conceived again and bore Simeon, which means to hear. And then she bore a third son named Levi, which basically means joiner. And then finally, she bore a fourth son and named him Judah, I will praise. And as you know, and they didn't know, Judah would be the believers, he would carry on the believers' line. We knew Abraham, we know Isaac, and we now know, and Jacob, and now we know one of the 12 sons. A lot of people think Joseph. Joseph had to do it, but no, it wasn't Joseph. It was Judah, which is not commonly known. And we'll see that later, not tonight. So he will carry it on. So Leah takes a break from having babies. I think that's time for a little rest. Something so we know about that. So let's take a look. I'm going to share my screen. I'll be using the REV, the Revised English Version tonight. And if you're not familiar with that, if you're using another version, that's perfectly fine. But the translation that I read might be a little bit different from yours if you have an NIV or others. Or you can just look on the screen because I'm going to share my screen and you will be able to see all the verses I'm reading anyhow. So win-win situation. So here we go. Right, so everybody should see my screen now, and we're in Genesis chapter 30 in verse 1. Oops, I'm not there. Here I'm over here. Now we are, and then let me get back here. You can see. All right, here we are in Genesis chapter 30, um, verse 1. So we just finished 29, and that was so Leah had her 4 sons. Now, when Rachel saw that she did not bear any children, Rachel envied her sister. She said to Jacob, "Come, give me children, or else I will die." So Rachel becomes a little dramatic. She's envious and dramatic. Neither one's a really good character, but that's what happens when people are under pressure. She wanted kids and she wasn't having them. And so then Jacob became angry with Rachel and said, "Am I in God's place who has withheld you from the fruit of your womb?" So that was his response. So this is Jacob's or Rachel's remedy. She said, "Here's my slave Bilhah. Go to her that she may bear on my knees, and I also may build a family by her." This was an okay thing back in those days. Children were so important because if you didn't have children, you could oftentimes be homeless by the time you got older. You needed children to care for you as you cared for your children when they were young. And so children were important. And especially if the husband died, then it wasn't like they just go to work at 7-Eleven or something. The opportunities available were slim. So anyhow, God allowed this, and oftentimes they're called concubines. They're a wife, but they're not a true wife in the real sense. So she gave him Bilhah, her slave, as a wife, and Jacob went to her, which is meaning he consummated the union, and Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. So Rachel's happy now. Then Rachel said, "God has judged me. Indeed, he has heard my voice and given me a son." So he called his name Dan. So Rachel's feeling a lot better now. And I want to take a moment just to go back to Genesis 16, because this also deals with what we just talked about with the slave girl and Rachel. Same thing happened with Sarah and Abraham, and this is the names they were given at birth. God later changes them to Abraham and to Sarah. But right now it's so Sarai and Abram, "Behold, now Yahweh has prevented me from bearing." This is Sarah saying, "Go to my slave. Perhaps I can build a family by her." And Abraham listened to the voice of Sarah. So this was done by Abraham and Sarah. And now it's accepted, as I said, and now it's being done here. So she has born a son, and Rachel said what he said. Now she's got a son now named Dan. So to recap a little bit, we got Abraham, who had a son through his wife Sarah, whose name was Isaac. Isaac had more and I mean, Abraham had more sons with a second wife, and we'll go into that later. And then Isaac, Abraham's son through Sarah, married Rebekah, and she had the twins, Jacob and Esau. And then now Jacob married Rachel and Leah, and he would eventually have 12 sons. So I just want to keep bringing this up because sometimes it can get a little bit, what? Who married who? So, and we'll go over this a little bit later in the teaching. Rachel's dramatic explanation, "or else I will die," it's got several possible meanings. It doesn't necessarily, it's not like she's going to die, literally. I got to have a kid or I'm going to just roll over and die. Wasn't saying she would do that, but in that culture, especially with an older husband, Jacob was quite a bit older. I think Jacob was 70 when he got married, and now he's 77, 7 years later. And now the years are going by. He's had 4 more kids. So it's a few years even after that. And he's getting to be, have that age. And so she's worried, what if he dies and I have no kids? And she also may have just feared, her memory might have faded out with if she had no offspring, she might be forgotten. And there's also just that deep yearning that women often have to have children, and they're a blessing. It's a wonderful desire. So we know the culture allowed for taking a slave to bear children, as we see with Hagar and Abraham, as I just read to you. Hagar was the slave girl, and then she had Ishmael. While the Bible doesn't forbid polygamy in the Old Testament, every record of it shows that problems arose because of it. I brought this up on the several times, and here you're going to see it again. We've got Jacob, he's going to have two wives, and there's not going to be harmony in the home. As we learn in the New Testament, it's now wrong to have more than one wife, and there are good reasons for that. And we're going to see some of them tonight. So let's go back into, we'll go back to Genesis 30. And I think we're about ready for verse 6. And we read that one. And I think I know. Yeah. So here we are in 5. I read 5, but I did want to say that Bilhah bore this son, and the son's name was Dan, which means to judge. So we've got another name here. Rachel's slave Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. And Rachel said, with mighty wrestlings, I have wrestled with my sister and prevailed. So she named him Naphtali. There's this tone with Rachel there, and we're going to see this keep going on. She can be a little bit resentful. You see, she's losing the baby war. Rachel, Leah's had 4, right? 4 kids. Rachel couldn't have any, but now she's got 2. And so she's wrestling with God. And this wrestling idea is kind of brought through in some of the words here. The name that she gives the child, the second son, Naphtali, means God has judged me and vindicated me. So she's got this attitude, and we'll see this develop. Where her sister Leah, her names that she gives to her kids seem to reflect more of her love for God. So let's go on in verse 9. When Leah saw that she had stopped bearing, she had those 4 kids. So let's see, I've got 4 now, and Rachel couldn't have any, but she really does because her slave had 2. So she's got 2, I got 4, and now I'm not having any kids. So her solution was, in verse 9, she took Zilpah, her slave, and gave her to Jacob as a wife. And Zilpah, Leah's slave, bore Jacob a son. Where are we now? We're now at 6, something like that. And Leah says, how fortunate. And so she named him Gad. So Gad means fortunate or luck. These names are interesting. So let's go on to 12. And Leah's slave Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. And Leah said, I am happy, for the daughters will call me happy. She knows the men won't. In their culture, men didn't get excited about having daughters as they did sons, but the women will be, because she had a son here. And so anyhow, she names him Asher. So they're going to call her happy. So now we've got the 4 sons, Leah, 2 sons by Bilhah, which are accounted for Rachel. Now we got 2 more sons from Zilpah, which are counted for Leah. So now we're tied, isn't it? 4-4. Okay, so we go on to verse 14. All right, in verse 14, check my notes here. In the days of the wheat harvest, Reuben was the firstborn. So we've had, 8 children since then. And if you figure, we'll guess around 2 years for each child in between, maybe. So 2 and 8, 16. So Reuben's probably a teenager, young teenager, maybe as old as 16, maybe a little younger, maybe a little older. So Reuben goes out, the oldest, the firstborn, goes out and he finds mandrakes in the field, and he brought them to his mother Leah. Well, Leah hasn't been having babies on her own. Her slave girl has been. So he brings these mandrakes to his mom. And Rachel says to Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. She wants some too. And then she comes back with this little snappy little thing. She said to her, "Is it not enough that you've taken my husband? Would you take my son's mandrakes also?" Rachel said, "Very well. He may lie with you tonight in exchange for your son's mandrakes." Can you believe this stuff? I mean, we're talking about Israel's, Jacob's wives, and this is what's going on. But I want to pause here for a moment and take a look at a picture. When I heard this, and you probably are going to think the same. Let me see what I got up here before I'm going to stop sharing a moment, and then I'm going to bring up my photos here. I never know what's going to pop up, so I'm going to pop up what I want you to see. So what I want you to see is a picture of a mandrake, and this was the first time I ever saw one, and maybe it's the first time you ever did. But this is a mandrake, and this is the root. It's kind of almost like a carrot, and it's got a top which is just leaves, really no stems. So this mandrake, now the wheat harvest, as I mentioned earlier in the verse, is probably May or June, and he goes out and gets these mandrakes, and the mandrakes are interesting. They have large leaves, they have violet flowers, and the flowers will bear fruit which are kind of yellow, and they are about the size of a tomato. Now, the Hebrew word for mandrakes is related to the word for love. So there's an interesting connection here. And the fruit was thought to promote fertility, though there's really no scientific basis for that belief. So here we've got this, what we got going on here is we've got, and you can see the bluish or violet flowers here. And so they've got this mandrakes, and they think this is going to help them be more fertile. So that's what they did. And so here we go. When Jacob came from the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, "You must come to me, for I have hired you with my son's mandrakes." So he lay with her that night. God listened to Leah. In spite of all this stuff going on, we talked about this over and over again. And we think today people are so sin conscious and so very conscious about their behaviors, but yet God is so gracious and overlooks so many things. And so, even in spite of all this, well, I want this and I want that, and I'm upset about this and yada, yada, the drama, God's just going through it because he's got that, he knows what he's after, and he's going to move toward that. God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. So now we've got a fifth son here from on her side. Leah said, "God has given me a reward." Now, this is the one she had. So she's had four sons. Her slave has two. Now she has one more. So she's got five sons, and her slave girls have two. So now she's got seven on her side. "God has given me a reward because I gave my slave to my husband," and she named him Issachar. So Issachar is the Hebrew for reward, or a man who is my reward. So back in verse 19. So Leah conceived again and bore a sixth son to Jacob. And Leah said, "God has endowed me with a precious gift. Now my husband will honor me." She was after that. She was always the loveless wife. Rachel was a favorite. "Now my husband will honor me after she's had all these sons, because I have borne him six sons." And she named him Zebulun. And Zebulun means to dwell or honor. So in chapter 21, afterwards she bore a daughter. So this is the one daughter that we're aware of that's recorded that was born, and it was born by Leah. And we're not going to go into Dinah right now, but again, her name tends to mean toward judged or vindicated. And she's going to play some important roles in the future. And we'll see that as we get through more chapters. And God remembered Rachel. It says here, he never really forgot her, but the remembering means that he showed her favor, honored her, and she conceived. And so then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb, and she conceived and bore a son. And this time, "God has taken away my reproach." She named him Joseph, saying, I'm sorry. I got to switch. We have switched back now to Rachel. So Rachel finally has her first real natural born baby. God remembered me, favored me, and God listened to her. And she finally, after all those years, opened her womb and she bore a son, and his name was Joseph. God has taken away my reproach, and she named him Joseph. May Yahweh add another son to me. The word Joseph means add. And so she states it like a prayer. May God add another son to me. And he does. And so that's going to come up later. So we got a kind of a reprieve here. Some stuff is going to happen in the meantime. So we've got Jacob back with the flocks. And in verse 25, and when Rachel had borne Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, send me away that I may go to my own place and to my own land. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, and let me go. For you know my service with which I have served you. And we do. He served 14 years to get the two wives, and he only wanted one for 7, but he served at 14. And now we'll learn later on, it's been up to 20 years now. He's now serving Laban 20 years. And what's he doing? He's taking care of the flocks. God's blessing him. Laban has been kind of tricky, but Jacob has been doing the right thing. So in verse 27, is that 27? Yeah. Laban says to him, if I have found favor in your eyes, for if I have found favor in your eyes, and dot, 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 that favor here is kind of uh, it's an actual, it's a type of a, hang on just a second, a type of figure of speech where he just kind of paused there for a moment. And instead of saying, going on and going over all of it, what he wanted to say, like he wanted to say, will you continue to work for me? But he didn't. He just kind of let that lie. If I have found favor in your eyes, for I have learned by divination that Yahweh has blessed me because of you. Now, this divination always, we got a kind of a negative spin on that because it can be used the wrong way, but it also can be used the right way in that God talked to him and told him that. But this figure of speech is like, if I have found favor in my eyes, but then he didn't finish it. It's kind of like when you got, when one of your kids was acting up, and so you say, go take a timeout in your room, and you still hear him in there, playing or on the phone or whatever. And you have to say, don't make me come in there. And you don't say the rest, right? Don't make me come in there and punish you more. But that's the kind of figure of speeches. I think that helps us understand what kind of figure it is. So anyhow, in verse 28, he says, tell me your wage and I will pay it. Okay. Jacob takes him at his word and says, okay. So he said to him, this is Jacob talking, you yourself know how I have served you and how well it has gone with your livestock under my care. For the little you had before I came has increased abundantly. Yahweh has blessed you wherever I turned, whatever Jacob did, whatever work he did, wherever he set his foot, God blessed it. Now, when will I provide for my own house? I've been doing this for you, and you have greatly been blessed by it and gained by it. Because when I saw you, some 20 years ago, you had hardly anything. Now look. So in verse 31, Laban speaking now, what should I give you? Okay, Jacob said, you do not need to give me anything. I will pasture your flock and keep it if you will do this thing for me. Okay, so this is the condition that Jacob is presenting to Uncle Laban in verse 32. Let me pass through all your flocks today, removing from there every speckled and spotted sheep and every sheep that is dark colored among the lambs, and the spotted and speckled among the goats. This will be my wage. So he wants to take out of the flocks which have prospered under him these. So he doesn't want all of them, but he makes it a very simple way. He didn't say, I want 50 head or 100 head or 1,000 head. He said, I'll take the speckled ones and the ones that are dark colored among the lambs and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and this will be my wage. So my righteousness will testify for me in the future when you come concerning my wage that is in front of you. Any that are with me that are not speckled and spotted among the goats and dark colored among the sheep, which be counted as stolen. He's saying, you can check my flock. You know, if there's anything that's not speckled or dark colored, like I said, you can call me a thief. So this is how Jacob is laying it out to him. And so apparently Laban has looked over the flocks a time or two, and he probably knows that the speckled and spotted and dark colored are in the very small minority, knowing Laban. And Laban said, good, let it be according to your word. All right, so Laban agrees with it. He says, that's a good deal. And so that day, now don't be confused here, because sometimes you can read this and you're going to think this is Jacob. It's not, it's Laban. So that day, Laban, removed the male goats that were speckled and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, and every one that had white on it, and the dark ones among the sheep, and gave them to the hands of his sons. And he set a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob continued to shepherd the rest of Laban's flocks. How do you like that guy? He agrees to it, and then he takes all of them that he said Jacob had and gives them to his sons and hides them 3 days' journey away. What a nice guy. Okay, so Jacob, not to be taken advantage of, he comes up with a plan, and this is a very unique plan. Modern science can't figure it out, but something was there. And it seems like when we read in chapter 31, we'll see God was behind this. So Jacob takes these branches, he takes branches of fresh cut poplar, almond, and oriental plane tree, and he peels the bark. So the white streaks in them, exposing the white that is in the branches. And he sets the branches that he has peeled in front of the flocks in their troughs, in the watering trough. So he pours water over these branches that he's peeled where the flocks came to drink, and they bred when they drank. And that doesn't mean immediately, but what we're talking about, what we're seeing here is he's working to get more speckled sheep and to do it quickly. So who knows? We don't know what is in this. There's no scientific to cause them to have quick gestation periods or, want to come into estrus quicker, but this is what happened. So he separates. And so the flocks, okay, where am I? Jacob took the branches, as I mentioned, he peeled them, and the flocks bred in front of the branches, and the flocks gave birth to streak, speckled, and spotted offspring. So all of a sudden, there's now an abundance of these kinds of animals that he agreed with Laban that he could have. So Jacob separated the lambs and set them in the direction of the streak, and all the dark in the flock of Laban, and he put herds apart for himself. And he did not put them in Laban's flock because they're his, right? They're speckled. But he had to do this again. It didn't happen overnight either, right? So Laban stole the animals that he said Jacob could have. Jacob doesn't make a big stink over it, but comes up with a plan so that the existing flock will give birth to more of the kind that Laban agreed he could have. What a godly solution to what could have really been a negative deal. So then, not only that, as we continue, God continues to bless Jacob. And whenever the stronger of the flock conceived, Jacob laid the branches in the troughs in front of the eyes of the flock in order that they would conceive by the branches. And when an animal of the flock or herd was feeble, which meant they did not come into estrus, they did not want to conceive, they didn't seem to be that fertile, he did not put it in. So the feebler ones he gave back to Laban, and the stronger were to Jacob. So what was the result of this? The man increased exceedingly and had large flocks and female servants and male servants and camels and donkeys. So what we're seeing here is God blessed Jacob abundantly because, and prospered him a whole lot. And, it's really cool how Jacob handled this. This could have been a rough situation and been pretty negative, but it wasn't. And so, this is how it ends up. Now we've got some really interesting things coming up in the next chapter, but I don't want to keep you late. And so I got chapter Genesis 31. So we're going to stop here and we're going to continue with the story, which continues to grow. And I think you'll really find it. I think you'll find it interesting, and we can learn some things that we can actually apply today on how to heal and how to deal with these negative situations. What Jacob did was, here's the situation. He had to pray. Well, how do I deal with this? This guy is not being a good father-in-law, right? He's taking the animals that he gave to me and hides them. And now, so what do I do? So God gives him this plan, and he does it, and now he's more prosperous than ever, very wealthy, and it's a good thing. So Heavenly Father, Lord Jesus Christ, thank you for your word and for how you bless us. Thank you for the beauty of the night, the evening, our time together. And thank you for your word, which is exciting and stuff that we can learn and apply to us. And also just how we see how you love people. And even though they do things that are sinful, not godly, show all kinds of bad character and the like, you still love them. And those who do show good character, you bless abundantly, like with Jacob. So, Heavenly Father, thank you for a sweet sleep tonight, for a wonderful evening, a great weekend coming up, and taking care of us and protecting us. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.